thought is simpler than other methods. Turn to Mark chapter 9. We are closing in on the end of Mark 9 relatively rapidly. I think we've only done it for about 4 weeks, so it's about time to get it over with. Mark chapter 9. Well, last time, frankly, I ran out of time, so we cut our sermon in half, and you'll get the second half of that sermon today. In Mark chapter 9, and let's see. Okay, let's go to verse 33 in Mark chapter 9. And he came into Capernaum, and being in the house, he asked them, "What was it that you disputed among yourselves on the way?" And they held their peace, for by the way they had disputed among themselves who should be the greatest. And he sat down, and he called the 12, and he saith unto them, If any man desire to be first, the same shall be last of all, and servant of all. And he took a child, and he set him in the midst of them. And when he had taken him in his arms, he said unto them, Whosoever shall receive one of such children in my name, receiveth me, and whosoever receiveth me, receiveth not me, but him that sent me. Last time we talked about, we were really talking about 2 different instances, the one we talked about last week and this one, but in both cases, the apostles were driven to silence. Okay? Last week they were driven to silence because they were ignorant. That's what the scripture says. They didn't understand something, and they were afraid to ask because they were afraid that people might know that they didn't know. Okay? That's why they did it last week. This week they're silent in this particular event. This week they're silent, but there's a very different reason that they're silent. Jesus asked them, what were you talking about on the way? As we know, they're traveling through Galilee. They come to Capernaum. They get to the house, and he says to them, what were you talking about on the way, or disputing about? And it's that same word that we talked about, that this is kind of debating. This is questioning. These guys were fighting amongst themselves about who was the greatest. Now, we can, of course, find parallel passages in the Scripture, and we have, around this time, James and John coming up to Christ and saying, James and John's mother coming up to Christ. They weren't willing to ask themselves, but they came up to Christ and they said, would it be okay for my sons to sit on your right and left-hand side when you come into your kingdom? And Christ said, well, I can't. I'm not going to make that choice. The Father in heaven, that's his choice. But that kind of bothered the rest of the apostles because they wanted to be greatest and sit on the right and the left-hand side. So today we're looking at this passage where they're walking through Capernaum, or they're actually sitting in a house in Capernaum. They've been walking through Galilee, and Christ asked them, what were you arguing about on the way? Now, the Scripture is very clear as to why they were silent. And it says, but they held their peace, for by the way they had disputed among themselves who should be the greatest. Sometimes people are silent because they're ignorant. We saw that last week. Sometimes people are silent because of sin. It's as simple as that. Some people are silent because of sin. These disciples knew that Christ would not appreciate that they were arguing about who was going to be the greatest among them. He wasn't happy with it. They were sinning by choosing the greater place. In one place in the Scripture, it says that your leaders in the church, he's talking to the apostles, your leaders are not to be chosen the way of the Gentiles. Okay? It's not to be chosen the way of the Gentiles. The leadership in the church was to be the one who would serve. And here he gives some illustrations of that. He first goes and he says, if any man desire to be first, the same shall be last of all and servant of all. If you want to get ahead in business, this isn't the model I would choose. Because if you're the servant of all and you don't support yourself and defend yourself and say why you're good, well, they might not hire you in the first place. Because one of the things you look at when you look at candidates for a job, and I helped interview a candidate for an engineering job at Motorola yesterday. And one of the things you look for in a candidate of that type is whether or not he's sure of himself. Does he know what he's doing? Is he willing to step out and do whatever it is he has to do? He has to be self-assured. But Christ is talking about the fact that someone who is first or a leader in the church is not to be that way. He's to be a servant. And second of all, when you're looking for a promotion, I can tell you when there's a job opening at Motorola, a higher position job opening, such as a manager or something else, something above your level, you can see people jostling for position, to position themselves in the best light to be selected for that leadership position. I can see people on the rise in my workplace, and I can see them positioning themselves to be better than everyone else, to climb the ladder of success upon the backs of others. That's how we, in our world, choose leadership. Christ told them it was not to be so among them. The one that seeks to be first should be last. You ever see kids, they're lining up for the bus, and everybody's kind of jostling for that first position to get in the bus, to get the best seat in the house? Right? Get the best seat on the bus? I learned when I was 5 years old that wasn't necessarily the place to be. I was in front. I was waiting for the Sunday school bus, standing on the curb, and all the kids were jostling behind me. And, the crowd was pushing, and I slipped off the curb. And the bus drove up and stopped right on my foot. That's why I don't go to Sunday school anymore. So it isn't always necessarily the best place to be in the front of that line. We, in our world, jostle for position, but Christ's view is that the first should be the servant of all. plain teaching. And it also shows that we sometimes keep silent when we don't want people to know that we're sinning. Well, you don't have to spend much time in the book of 1 John or John to understand that people who are steeped in sin love darkness because their deeds are evil. You know, do you want somebody to shine a light into every corner of your life? I know I don't. They might find some things that I don't want them to find out. So sometimes when we sin, we hide from our sin or hide our sin from the world because we don't want people to find out that we're sinners. We want to be, we know that we're sinners, but we're just one step down from Christ. We don't sin too badly. We're pretty righteous. That's the way we present ourselves to the world. But sin causes us to be silent. Sin causes us not to answer the question. Sin causes us not to make a stand. All you got to do is look at the recent election campaign, and I'm watching the aftermath on MSNBC, which I like MSNBC, even though they hold a different worldview than I do. But I'm watching it, and since for about a week, all they've talked about is how people in the Republican Party are saying that Sarah Palin is the worst person that ever lived. She had they don't say those words, Jeff, not those words, but how she spent $150,000 on clothes, and these people within the campaign are complaining about that, and how she was this way or that way or some other way. You know what happens when you stand up and take a position? Sometimes people are going to shoot at you. Some people are going to take their shots. So sometimes we don't take a position because we don't want people to find out those little things about us. So we don't want people to find that out. I found out that Obama kicked 3 reporters off of his plane because their papers had come out and supported the other candidate. Sometimes we do things because we don't want people to find out stuff about us. I don't think that that's the way we should be. Now look, we're all sinners. Clearly, if we were to go into 1 John, I could take you to a couple of passages. One of them says, if a man says that I am without sin, he is a liar, and the truth is not in him. So we're all sinners. The thing that separates us from the world should be the fact that we know we're sinners, but it also should be that we know that Christ's blood was sufficient for our sin. And I think another part of that is sort of like what Paul said. He said, the things that I would do, I don't do. The things that I really hate, these are the things I do. But notice, he hates them. And I think we ought to hate sin. And we ought to hate the sin in our lives. But these disciples in this house in Capernaum